If I'm wrapping up my winter TBR now, does that mean the temperatures are going to start getting better? Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am wrapping up my winter TBR. Because I usually get a little bit of a reading slump when it comes into December and I knew that this was something that I was going to experience, I didn't put 6 books onto my winter TBR this year as I usually do for other seasonal TBRs. Instead, I only put on 5. But I don't know if that necessarily meant that it was the most successful TBR I've ever made. To start off is unfortunately the book that disappointed me most out of this TBR, and that is The Mercies by Kieran Millward Hargrave. This is the one that I think I was most looking forward to, and I think it was also going to be the most atmospheric one. It is set on an island off the coast of Norway where the entire male population over the age of about 2030 has been completely wiped out in a sea storm. They have all been wiped out in a fishing accident. So you are watching what has happened with the women and the children who have been left behind. But about 18 months after the accident, they receive a letter from Scotland that a man who lives there is going to come to the community and is going to try and set up a new establishment and a new way of them living. I did not get as hooked with this book as I think I wanted to. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was the writing style. I don't know if it was the storytelling. I don't know if it was the story itself, which I believe is based on an actual true story. It just didn't work for me. Maybe I didn't find the characters very engaging. Maybe I just didn't get anything out of the story, but I think I expected a lot more out of this than I'd actually gotten. I had seen a lot of really great reviews of this one. I had seen so many people who had loved it, and I had a feeling that because I was reading it during like stormy weather, cold weather, winds, rain battering the windows while I was sitting close to the fire with a book and a blanket reading it, I don't know, maybe I had this kind of idealized version of it in my head, and when it didn't hit those heights, maybe it just didn't work for me overall. Something atmospheric though that thankfully did work for me is Holiday Romance by Catherine Walsh. I read this on the plane coming back to Dublin from Berlin for Christmas, and I think that was the perfect time to read it. In this book, you are following Molly and Andrew, who are living in Chicago and have been living in Chicago for about 10 years. And every Christmas Eve, they get the last flight leaving Chicago to get back to Dublin in time for Christmas, to spend time with their families and to have a Christmas break for themselves. Unfortunately, this year, there is a huge storm brewing over the Atlantic, and every flight that's leaving Chicago Atlantic bound has been cancelled. So they go into this massive panic, 36-hour, 4-country flight trying to get back to Dublin in time. Thankfully, my own trip back home for Christmas was a little bit less chaotic and a little bit less eventful, but I really loved watching them trying to figure out how are we going to get from here to here and what happens when we get here, how are we going to get to Dublin and all of this kind of thing, especially because Andrew was from down the country. Andrew was from Cork, so when he got to Dublin, he also had that added thing of how am I going to get from Dublin to Cork, which is about a 2.5 to 3 hour drive. This is a friends to lovers book, and it's something that I really love reading. I love reading the friends to lovers trope, and this one did it really well in that you can actually genuinely see the chemistry between Molly and Andrew. You can see that they have got 10 years of friendship in their arsenal. They've got these 10 years of inside jokes and of friendship and all of that behind them, which really does strengthen their relationship when it turns into something more romantic. Something else that I really loved is that there's a huge emphasis on them being Irish. There's a huge emphasis on them like running around Chicago trying to find Irish things, or the panic of trying to get back to the airport in time. Something that a lot of immigrants are going to associate with, something that I definitely associated with. And it's something as well that I've seen a lot in Catherine's writing. She writes a lot of stories about people who have left Ireland and are now living in the US. And that's something that is definitely a pull factor for me for her books, because I can share in that experience and I know what that's like to live outside of the culture that you were brought up in and to live outside of the standards and the norms that you're so used to and trying to kind of ingratiate yourself in a brand new way of living. Something a little bit different for this book though in terms of what I usually read of a romance is that this isn't very steamy. It's got a closed door sex scene, but that didn't really actually put me off. It didn't really upset me as much as I think I thought it would have, because a lot of the books that I read are quite open door. But this was a kind of a nice palate cleanser. I think it was a nice way to end the year. It was a very gentle way to end the year, and I really, really enjoyed this. I know that Catherine has got another book coming out in April or so, and I'm definitely going to have a look at that. But she also has 2 other books that have been previously released, The Rebound and One Night Only. And if you like the sound of this, if you like the kind of themes that she has been writing about, definitely go and have a look at those. Next up is The Heart Principle by Helen Hoang, and I finished this maybe about 2 days ago, but it's still January. In Ireland, January is still winter, so it still can. This is the third book in the Kiss Quotient series, and I don't really know if it belongs to the series because this book, I feel, has been mismarketed. I think a lot of people think that this is a contemporary romance book, but I don't think I would market it as that. I would market it as a contemporary commercial fiction book, but I don't think it should belong in the romance genre. I did go into it kind of thinking that this was a romance book, but I had a couple of people telling me, actually, this is more so a book of two halves. In the first half, you have got a romance budding between Anna and Kwan, who are our two main characters. But in the second half of the book, Anna's family experiences a personal tragedy, and the book really shifts into this kind of gear instead, where it's about Anna overcoming this kind of tragedy that she has just gone through, and Anna coming to terms with a late life diagnosis of autism, which happens in the first half of the book too. I really enjoyed this book though. I know it wasn't exactly what I was expecting going into it. I know it wasn't exactly what I thought it would be going into it, but I genuinely really enjoyed this. I do think we should have seen a little bit more of their relationship in the first half of this book. I do wish that we had seen a little bit more of Kwan, especially because it felt a little more of an Anna book than it felt an Anna and Kwan book. And I would have loved to see a little bit more of Kwan, his personality, his story, his family, his background, especially because we have seen a bit of him from The Bride Test, which is the previous book in the series. We had seen a little bit of his background and of his family situation there, so I would have loved to see that a little bit more in this book. But overall, I do feel like we got to see not quite a lot of Anna and Kwan. I would like to have seen a little bit more. I did, however, love the discussion of a later life diagnosis of autism. I feel like this is something that was so gently dealt with. And as you can tell from the author's note, this is something that is very personal to Helen herself. It's something that has happened to Helen in her own life. And you can really see the impact that that has had on her and also how well it translates into the pages of this book. I am definitely going to have a look for other Helen Huang books. If she ever does publish anything again, I'm definitely going to have a look for it. But if somebody comes to me and asks if they should read this book, I am going to tell them yes, but do have the caveat in mind that this is not a romance book and this is a little bit heavier than I think that you would expect it to be. Next up is American Royalty by Tracy Lipsey, and a little bit like The Mercies, I think this book kind of disappointed me more than I was expecting it to. I got this book as part of the Words and Kisses book box that I had bought myself for my birthday last year. It was the November pick, I think, and it was also the November book club book for the Pyramid Book Club, which is run by Michelle, Lexie and Monica. I read this book. I didn't actually join in with their live show because it was held in the middle of the night for my time, and it's definitely something that I'm going to go back to and see how they feel about it. But I think I was a little bit disappointed by this book. This book follows Dani, who is a well-respected rapper. She is at the top of her game, and she also has a kind of a side hustle as a skincare expert. She has a skincare line that's come out. Jemison is the grandson of the Queen of England, and he is tasked with setting up a commemorative concert for his grandfather who has died the previous year. So he's in charge of the guest list, he's in charge of the venue, he's in charge of the menus, everything. And while he's searching through performers that he thinks could be here, he comes across Dani, he finds her name, and her stage name is the Duchess. So he thinks, this is the perfect person that I'm going to have on stage in front of my grandmother, in front of the rest of my family. But he doesn't know that she is a pretty explicit rapper and that her songs are not really suitable for a garden party venue that he's going to be having instead. So there is a little bit of a forced proximity in this book, and that's something that I really love, but it was way too insta-lovey this time. I love a forced proximity when you can see their feelings build over time. When you see it kind of simmering at the start and then it just rises and rises until everything boils over. But this whole time it was just boils over all the time. There was never really any kind of build up to their relationship. It just went straight in, and I genuinely mean straight in. It felt like they had literally just met each other, and 2 pages later this guy is talking about how he's probably met the love of his life, and Dani herself is thinking about how this is the perfect guy for her and she's never going to find anybody better. There are, of course, a couple of similarities to Harry and Meghan's relationship, and at times these can be a little bit too stark. At times he can be a little bit too on the nose for me, I think. And there are other times where you just have to suspend your disbelief completely for this book to make sense. So I think that that kind of mismatch of ideas also just didn't make this work for me. Something else that I thought while I was reading this book, and particularly towards the end of it, is that this is not a relationship that I see lasting the end of this book. This is not a relationship where if you were to pick up an epilogue 12 months later, 16, 18 months later, It's not a relationship that I see still going. It's not something that I see having kind of an everlasting power. And that is something that you kind of want to have if you're reading a romance book. You want to have the feeling that these people are not just happy for now, that it's a happy ever after. So unfortunately, I don't think that this is an author I'm going to go back to. I don't think, if there's a second book in this series, I don't think it's one I'm going to reach out for. However, a book with a second in the series that I will absolutely definitely reach out for is Rosalind Palmer Takes the Cake by Alexis Hall. This was my first Alexis Hall book and I ate it whole. I absolutely adored this. It has such a cozy and comforting vibe to it. And I particularly recommend reading it as you are watching Bake Off, as you're watching the Stand Up to Cancer Bake Off or Celebrities Bake Off, or any of the Bake Off franchises from any country around the world, just as long as you are reading it while simultaneously watching people freak out about whether or not chocolate is going to temper. Perfect situation. This book follows the titular Rosalind Palmer, who is a single mother. She has got an 8-year-old daughter, and financially things are not going very well for her. She signs up for Bake Expectations, which is a baking show on TV. And while she is there, she meets with these wonderful people, especially with an electrician called Harry, who she really gets on well with. And he is the epitome of a cinnamon roll character. I absolutely wish that Harry was real. I think if I had to picture him in my head, the whole time I was reading it, I pictured him like the comedian Rob Beckett. For some reason, he just came to my mind because they were of a similar background, they were of a similar age, they spoke quite similarly. So that is somebody who was in my mind the whole time while I was reading this book. And if you've read this book and you know who Rob Beckett is, please tell me whether or not you agree. But also while she's on the show, she meets with a man named Alan, who her really upper class, really uptight parents would probably prefer her to get with at the end of the show. And throughout the whole book, I had this awful vibe about this guy. There was nothing that endeared me to him. There was nothing that I liked about him. And when he is involved with a sexual assault scene a little bit later on in the book, it just instantly confirmed everything that I had known about him. Something that comes up quite a lot in this book as well is Rosalind's bisexuality. It is addressed quite early on in the book from a comment that is made by her daughter's teacher, and it is addressed again during the sexual assault scene. And while those scenes were quite difficult to read, I felt that overall the depiction of Rosalind's bisexuality was really well done. It was never really overforced, it was never really overdone. It was kind of just Rosalind is bisexual in the same way that you would understand that I have green eyes. It's just who she is as a person. This book features a Bake Off style show, and the similarities to this show and Bake Off were so wonderful. They were so well done. You can tell that Alexis Hall is actually a fan of Bake Off, or if not, has done his research at least, because there were instances of contestants crying and the presenters sabotaging that by saying brand names or swearing or saying massive expletives so that these scenes couldn't be broadcast, or the technical challenges that the bakers had to do with absolutely no prior practicing whatsoever, and the kind of star baker and who's going home at the end of every episode. You could really tell that this is something that either is very close to Alexis Hall's heart or something that he has done massive amounts of research for. I also really liked the depiction of Rosalind as a single parent. It never really felt overdone. It felt very genuine as a part of the story. This is the first book in a series, as I've said. The second book is Paris Davenport is About to Crumble, and I have got a copy of it on my TBR that I am absolutely going to make a priority for 2023. Those are all of the books that were on my TBR for winter. What was the best book that you have read across winter this year? If you'd like to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me the snowman emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.